So there is 2 books in this one book, but I only chose to read the first book because that's the only book that caught my interest. And it was Fatherhood ×3, The Cowboy's Triple Surprise by Barbara White Daille. The last time Tyler Buckham was in Cowboy Creek, he spent a passionate night with Shay O'Neill, back in town before the next rodeo. He's hoping they can share that passion again. But seeing Shay pregnant with triplets is a shock that he wasn't prepared for. Tyler insists he wants to do right by Shay, by the triplets, but Shay knows she can't count on the promise of a cowboy. Now, what I love most about this book, we have a girl with a past and a boy with a past. Only the boy is still kind of trying to get over his past and is still a playboy. Where Shay, she doesn't have any time to be a play girl. She has to buckle down. And by buckle down, that's cowgirl up. Realize she's got 3 little ones on the way. And she's scared. So she's speaking from being scared. Speaking from, well, seeing what her family endured when her dad was a cowboy-like situation. So therefore, she doesn't want to experience that with her triplets. So we're going to go ahead and read the little thing here. And then I'm going to go straight to the paper clips. Why are you here? Shay fought to keep her voice steady. Maybe I had the urge for dessert, Tyler grinned. Then you can find a more selection at sugar pies. Could be, but maybe what I want's right here. Once she would have fallen for that line and hoped he wanted her. She was so over that now, so over him. She slid open the freezer case and reached for an empty ice cream tub. It gave her an excuse to avoid his blue-eyed stare. But Tyler stepped up beside her. I'll get that. Thanks, but I'm pregnant, not incapacitated. I didn't think you were. He closed the freezer door. Let's just say I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine. He looked away as if now he only realized what he had said. He cleared his throat and looked back at her. I'll take care of this, and you can take care of a few things for me. Unfortunately, his attempt to make his point clearer only filled her mind with more images and memories of their night together. Suddenly, Shay didn't quite feel so over Tyler Buckham. Okay. Barbara White Daille and her husband inhabit their own special corner of the wild Southwest, where the summers are long and the lizards and scorpions roam. Barbara loves looking back at stories she wrote in grade school and realizing that she's doing exactly what she planned. She now has the double digits with published novels and still has a file full of drawers of stories to be written. Barbara hopes she'll enjoy reading her books. Visit her website at Barbara White Daille. Okay, so we're moving forward here to the paper clips. Paperclip 154 is real short. Unlike her granddaughter, lately Mo held his gaze. He couldn't have looked away if his life depended on it, and he wouldn't turn her down. It felt good to finally have someone willing to trust and depend upon him. Okay. Page 161. He's still a cowboy, she said bitterly. And he'll probably always be a cowboy, Lane said in a soft tone, just like 9/10 of the men in Cowboy Creek. If you're holding out for someone who doesn't wear boots and a Stetson to work, you may be waiting a very long time. Stop, you know what I mean. She and Lane had long ago shared their stories of their childhoods. I won't get involved with a cowboy. Lane laughed. Too late for that, girlfriend. Once you're sharing children, you've already gotten as involved as you can get. She sobered look. I know it was rough for you, not having your dad around and most of the time not having your mom either, but there are worse things about absentee parents. Yes, like falling for a man you can't trust. You're right, she said. Lynn and Cole have grown up with parents who were there physically but didn't support them in any way. Tyler seems to think his parents are made from the same mold. She could see his situation from that perspective. To her, what he had said made it clear that his mom and dad cared about his future. What more could a child ask for of a parent? Seeing Tyler cared for and the babies, what more could she ask of him? Okay. Page 176, 177, 178. What do you mean we agree on lots of things, not the ones that matter? Now her seated position made her feel like she was losing ground. She stood to face him. I told you my dad followed the rodeo too. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. We don't agree on work, I do. We don't agree on the gifts I bring home to the kids. Bibs and pajamas. How could I go wrong with those? But somehow they're not good enough for you. Bibs and pajamas with horses and saddles on them. They were just your way of trying to get your point across. Her eyes stung with angry tears. Maybe I'm wrong about being able to make a relationship with the babies work. You're not thinking about them at all. I am, probably more than you are. You're the one pulling strings already when they haven't even cut the first teeth. How is that any different from what you're doing? Last I heard you've got your plans for them all mapped out too. No, I was showing you an alternative. I'm trying to give the kids an option. She gasped. And you don't think that's what I want? I think you're controlling their futures. I'm not. She stopped and took a deep, steadying breath, arguing like this would only help prove Tyler's claim and that they couldn't agree on anything. You're just seeing me the way that you are because of how your father treated you. And you're not holding what I do for a living against me for the same reason. I'm a cowboy. That doesn't mean I'm just like your dad. He shoved his hands into his back pockets. It doesn't matter. I'm not staying. That's what I told you from the beginning. And I never said anything otherwise. As it is, I shouldn't have stayed this long. You made it plain as clear. You made it plain you don't trust me, but I'm telling you something you can take to the bank literally. Not a promise. A fact. I'll be sending you cash to help support the kids. The words hit like a knife, piercing her heart. I don't want your charity, she snapped. It's not a handout. I know, it's your obligation. Money, financial help, and you at a distance. Her frustrated sigh bordered on a sob. How can you walk away from our babies, especially after all the time you spent with them? They bonded with you as strongly as they have me. He said nothing. She wanted him here, being a dad to his kids. He wanted to negotiate a deal, then write babies off as a business expense. She took another deep breath and let it out slowly. Nothing I've said or can say will change your mind. No. The unyielding response left her speech from him stunned, surprised, and a flash of rage. The reaction gave her a beat of time to raise her defenses, to realize she was determined to win this battle, even if she'd already been defeated in the war. She would not let him see her break. She raised her chin. It's all just as well then, she said firmly. If you're not prepared to stay for the long haul, you might as well leave town. Page 207 is very short. That's not completely true, she grinned. You more than likely predicted who they would marry. He laughed. So I did. Well, after all, those couples needed a few nudges along the way, but I never had gotten involved if I didn't think the matches were meant to be. She froze in the process of shifting one of the sample books aside. Was that why Jed hadn't helped her? Did he believe that she and Tyler wouldn't make a good pair? Page 208. The point is, he continued, you have to respect those differences. You have to stand back and let your grandkids and your kids manage on their own. It seemed almost as if Jed had overheard the argument with Tyler. I think you're controlling their futures. When Tyler had begun to speak, she had cut him off. Now she would never know what else he might have added. She would never know if he might have been right. She looked at Jed. You have to help guide your kids as they grow up, though. Of course you do, but within reason. You also have to let them make their own choices and their own mistakes. Aside from all that, all you can do is love them and be there for them when they need you. Her babies would need a daddy too, but they wouldn't have one. They would have her to blame for that. I'll always be here for my kids. I have no doubt about that. He smiled at her, this clear blue eyes holding her gaze. And I think I've got the message, boss, she said softly. I should have expected you to try a little reverse psychology. You did everything you could to try to bring us together, didn't you, including leaving Tyler on his own the night of the wedding. He chuckled but said nothing else. Jed was helping after all. He was teaching her about love and acceptance and learning from her mistakes. Suddenly she realized Grandma had used the same tactics on her. You have to let him go from your heart. She couldn't let Tyler go. He was in her heart, and he always would be. She stared back at Jed. You and Grandma know exactly how I feel about Tyler, don't you? I think we do. She sighed. I messed things up, Joel. Tyler left because I told him to go. He reached across the bed and patted her hand. Nobody can fault you for that, girl. No matter how you feel, you need to do what's right for those babies. And are you doing the right thing by putting them first? Her eyes misted. She blinked the moisture away. Grandma said the same thing in just those words, and she and Jed were trying to help by forcing her to see her mistake for herself. Her worst mistake of all had come from not trusting Tyler. Moving on. Page 2, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, and 22, 23. I'll get it, Grandma, Shay called from the inside of the house. It's probably Jed. A minute later, the door swung open. She stood there with her hand gripping the doorway and had the day he'd come back from his shopping trip, the day he kissed her. Suddenly, he couldn't breathe at all. Her eyes were huge and glowing. You're here. He coughed and, out of breath, looked down at himself and then up again, not smiling. He said, Yeah, so I am. Can we talk? She frowned and his heart thundered against his breastbone. Looking puzzled, she stepped onto the porch. Wait, he said, could we talk upstairs? In the baby's room? He nodded. I want to see the kids. She stared past him to the flowers bowing in the breeze, yet her gaze seemed unfocused. They'll want to see you. They, not we. But she turned and went back inside. It was a start. He followed her through the living room and up the stairs. His heart was hammering harder than it should have after so little exertion. On the landing, he reached out to put his hand on her shoulder to stop her from walking down the hall. Instantly, the warmth of her made him a little crazy, made him want to take her in his arms, kiss her until she agreed to everything he was going to ask of her tonight. Sanity made him drop his hand and step back. Before we go in there, I have to tell you something. I want more than just one visit, Shay. I want to see the babies whenever I can. I want to know that I'm a part of their lives. He braced himself, knowing that after the way he left her again, he would have to fight for his rights, would have to face the risk of losing both the battle of something very precious in process. Stunned, he watched her and nodded. You are a part of their lives, and I'm not going to stand in your way of you seeing them. It was more than he had could hoped for, more than he deserved. In the baby's room, he went directly to the cribs. All the three were awake, probably ready for yet another feeding. He lifted Bree from the crib and held her against him. There's my little girl, he wanted to say, but didn't. She's bigger, he managed. Yes, Shay's features softened in a small smile. When you're only a month old, in a few weeks makes a huge difference. Are the checkups going okay? They're great. And now he saw a full smile he'd been waiting for. He wanted to reach out and touch her cheek. Instead, he brushed Bree's head lightly with his fingertips. She has curls. They all do. That's their hair. It's grown a bit. Bree turned her head, nestling against him the way she had before he left. His chest swelled with pride. She remembers me. His voice shook. I was just getting their bottle. Shay's voice sounded wobbly, too. Do you want to hold her while I go downstairs? Yeah, I do. He wanted much more than that, but one step at a time. Good George Strait song, just saying. Shay's question felt like a nod of acceptance. It gave him hope that coming back here had been the right thing to do. He hadn't lied. He wanted to see the babies whenever he could. Being a part of their lives had become important to him. Then he could believe that anything was possible. But as much as that would mean to him, it wasn't enough. He wanted to return to lead to something that he might never be able to earn, a permanent place in Shay's life, too. When she left the room, he carried the baby over to the rocking chair in the corner. What am I going to do, Bree? He asked quietly. I hurt your mom last summer. I hurt her a lot. Now I want to win her back. Bree stared up at him. The nurse at the hospital had told him that baby's age couldn't see very far. He held Bree up close to his face. She kept his gaze fastened on him. It's not going to be easy, I know that. First, I'm going to have to make amends somehow. And then your mom, she said I wasn't in this for the long haul. Maybe I didn't have an answer at that time, but I have one now. I'm with you and your brothers for life. He watched her closely. It'll take some doing to convince your mom. I'm not just making empty promises, but then when all is said and done, she'll believe me, don't you think? The baby squirmed in his arms. Her eyes crinkled shut, her mouth pursed and then pursed up with just the corners. He didn't care what Cole said. His little girl just smiled at him. He kissed her forehead. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Bree. From downstairs he heard the doorbell, followed by Shay's voice and another, deeper voice he recognized. A minute later he heard Jed's boots on the stairs. The older man appeared in the doorway. Well, look who's back. He crossed the room, his hand outstretched. Tyler shook hands with him. Couldn't stay away, could you, boy? No, I couldn't, he admitted. Can't say I blame you with 3 sons like these. If they were mine, I'd come home with 'em too." "Home?" Jed smiled. "That's where your heart is." Tyler looked down at Bree and then over at the boys in their cribs and finally at the woman who had just walked through the doorway. Jed was right. He had come back to Cowboy Creek because this was where he both found his heart and his home. Shay watched Tyler move restlessly around the baby's room. He looked like he wanted to run the way he had once before, but twice. Grandma had come upstairs to greet Jed. They all chatted for a few minutes, then the two of them had gone downstairs for a glass of sweet tea before supper. By that time, Shay had fed the babies. Tyler had brought Bree ready to go to the first time that Shay had agreed. Timothy had followed, and Jamie had eaten last. She tucked Jamie into the crib, returned to the rocking chair. "You'll stay for supper?" she asked Tyler. He turned to her. "Yes, I will." He cleared his throat and shoved his hands into his back pockets. "In that case you were wondering where I went when I left. I went back to Texas to the ranch where I'd been working, but things weren't the same as they were been there before I left. They just weren't the same. Becoming a daddy must make you look at everything differently. I know becoming a mom has had that effect on me." "That's part of it." He crossed the room to her and took a seat on the footstool. She put aside the small lamp of the dresser had made her hair glossy black, and the pearl snaps on the front of her shirt winked at her and his champion belt buckle shone in the light. "The other part is," he went on, "I've been feeling restless for a long time without knowing why. The feeling kicked in last summer when I came here for the wedding and spent time with all the Garlands and with you. Once I left, I was feeling worse instead of better." She held her breath. He smiled. "I think being around the hitching post made me see what I'd been missing, a family, and being with you made me want something I never wanted before, a place to settle for good." They need Ryan Paby to play this part in the book. Beautiful. Anyway, then why didn't you come back? Her voice broke. "I didn't know all this last summer. I didn't know it until a few weeks ago." He couldn't even meet her eyes. "It wasn't until I left this time that I figured out what was wrong." He rested his elbows on his knees and linked his fingers together in front of him. "While I was back in Texas, I took a trip out to see my folks." "How did that go?" He stared down at his hands. "Badly. Nothing worse than I might have imagined. I told you about my parents and my back, and that they never had my back, and that my father pushed me." When he didn't continue, she said, "I remember you said he tried to make a man out of you." "Yeah, but it wasn't that kind of man I wanted to be. And I wasn't the son they wanted. My father's a corporate lawyer with a big salary, clothes and cars, the condo to go with it. My entire life, my parents attempted to talk to me into following into their footsteps. I tried to accept their views and their ideas of success. Finally, I got to the point where I couldn't do that anymore because they're not my views." Now he looked at her, his eyes shining in the lamplight. "Shay, I might have grown up in the city, but I'm a born cowboy. That's the life I want. I don't want to live in that life alone." He took her hand and brushed his thumb across her knuckles. "I gave up the job in Texas. Again. Permanently this time. I talked to the manager at the hardware store here in town. He said he might have an opening coming up. He also gave me the name of a couple of the local distributors he worked with here and said that they're looking for the folks to do outside sales." He squeezed her fingers. "I'll do anything I have to do to prove to you that I'm ready to settle down. I want roots. I want a family. Our family." Her eyes flooded. She blinked and she couldn't hold back tears. He wiped them away. "Oh, Tyler," her exhilaration sounded like a sob. "You already have proven yourself to me and to everyone else who has met you here. I told you we can all see that you're a good man. You just are, just by the way you are and the way you care about the baby." She squeezed his fingers. "You must have believed me or you wouldn't have come back." His eyebrows came together in a puzzled frown. "You told me?" "Yes, in my message." "What message?" She blinked. "On your phone? I had Lane get your number from Cole and I called you this morning." "I haven't even looked at my phone since I left my parents' house last night. I heard a call come in earlier today and I just figured it was my father wanting to ram his point home about how irresponsible I've been." Suddenly he laughed. "You left a message," he said wonderingly. She nodded. "I told you just what I said now, that we all know that you're a good man, and," she added softly, "I asked you to come back so we could talk things out." "I'm here now." She nodded again. "Does that mean you've forgiven me for leaving you twice?" "Yes." She laced her fingers through his. "And I hope that you'll forgive me now for how I treated you when you came back. I'm sorry, Tyler. I was so wrong to push you away just because of what you do, of who you are." And you were right. I was holding my own experience with my dad against you. When I kept comparing you to him, I never really gave you a chance." She sighed. "I'm as bad as your parents are at not accepting your choices. You didn't know about them." "No, but I know about me and how overly sensitive I am about cowboys and the rodeo. I also know how you were right about my controlling of the baby's future, or at least that's what I seem to be doing, only because I was determined to justify my feelings and to win the argument." She blinked a few times, then stared at him. "I wouldn't try to run our children's lives. I'm so sorry I tried to do that to you. Does that mean I won't have to give up wrangling?" She laughed. "Yes, that's what that means. I believe in you, Tyler, and if you ever listen to my phone message, you'll know that I love you." He smiled. "I love you too." He cupped her face in his hands, brushed his mouth against hers, kissing her the way she loved to begin, soft, easy, and sweet, but this time there was a hint of spice that she loved too. It was that promise offered and accepted, a promise that wouldn't break. She put her hands on his shoulders and tilted her head back to look up at him. "You know," she said with a smile, "I've decided I would be content to have our babies follow in your footsteps." "Become cowboys, you mean?" When she nodded, he laughed. "Well, it's up to them, of course." She nodded again. "But if that's what any or all of them choose, it's fine with me, because my footsteps won't overtake me far from home." 2 months later, in the banquet hall of the Hitchin Post, Tyler stood around everyone looking around at him. Everything had turned out perfectly, according to Shay, who had told him more than once she was over the moon with happiness. He was just glad that his new bride hadn't had to do any of the work to prepare for their wedding. In fact, she'd given up her job at the hotel, for now anyway, to stay home with their babies. If her former boss resented the fact, he wasn't letting on. Jed looked darn good in his tuxedo and cummerbund. Tyler smiled. The man had given Tina away to Cole at their ceremony last year, and at the wedding where he first met Shay. "You're making a habit of walking brides down the aisle." "It's great advertising for the business," Shay said, with a laugh. "The Hitching Post can be used as a plug," Jed agreed. "I meant the matchmaking business." Now Jed and Tyler were laughing. As Jed walked away, Tyler looked across the dance floor to one of the tables at the front of the room. Shay had convinced him to extend a wedding invitation to his parents, and to his surprise they accepted. They sat at a table with Mo and Sugar, and all four of them had their heads bent over the baby books Mo had brought to show off everyone at the reception. Pictures were nice, but he looked forward to seeing the kids upstairs later, where Pete's housekeeper was minding them for the evening. "What do you think?" Shay asked. She was looking in that direction. "For the baby's sake, I think they can make an effort to get along." The band struck up another slow song. He took her into his arms. "Speaking of getting, you're happy you got your June wedding?" "Of course I am. It's something I always dreamed about my entire life. And so are you?" Her unconditional support was all he ever could have wanted. "That's little enough to give you after everything you've given me, love and a home and a family. And you've made today the best day of my life." "I've done more than that." He smiled down at her. Her eyes sparkled. "I'll say you carried our kids for almost 9 months and brought them into this world and named them Timothy, Jamie, and Bree." "So you did." "Timothy, Jamie, and Bree," she said with soft emphasis. "Great names. Timothy, He stopped in short in the middle of the dance floor, hardly believing the mental leap that he had just made. "Timothy, Jamie, Bree. Tyler, John, Buckham," he said, his voice cracking. "You gave them my initials." She nodded. "I decided on the day the doctor told me I was carrying 3 babies. The day—" His throat grew so tight he couldn't even speak. He waited for a moment and tried. "Even after I left all those months ago?" "Even after. I wanted them to have the connection with you." She rested her cheek against his chest, and he tilted his head down to hear her voice over the music. Her breath tickled his ear. "Even when I wanted to hate you, I loved you, Tyler. When the doctor told me the news, I was still upset about your leaving, but about realizing I might never see you again, and that the babies might never know you, but I also realized that you were a part of them and always would be." She raised her head to meet his eyes. He smiled through a blur. He blinked, cleared his throat, and smiled. "I love Timothy, Jamie, and Bree. I know you do." He held her closer. "And I love you, Shay. I'll always be here for you and the kids." She smiled. "I believe you, cowboy. And we all love you, too." Whew. that book gets a 22, and you have to read it to see all the times that there was spooking going on both sides. And yes, he ran twice, but yes, she forgave him twice too. And sometimes you have to have that forgiveness in order to truly experience love. And that's the only way to really know if you're in love or not, is if you can forgive with your whole heart, love with your whole heart, and be all in with your whole heart. But remember this. This is something that I took away from a country song years ago. One of my favorites, Aces, by Susie Boggess. You can't deal me the aces and think I wouldn't play. Don't let this be the reason you would walk away. One of my favorites. And with that, good night. God bless. Wash your hands. Keep your social distance. Keep your mask on. And if you have to, use your hand sanitizer. God bless.